Hi everyone, I'm Sandra Ingerman and welcome to the Shamans Cave.
And I'm Renee Baribeau, and we are really excited that you're here today because we are going into the shadow. And that shadowy area where we like kind of sometimes don't like to live, but when we don't look at it, then we dwell there. So this is a really important topic, and it's going to be a two-parter. We're going to talk first about the personal shadow, and I'm going to lead us in a mirror exercise. And then we're going to go into a second part where we're going to talk about the collective shadow. And Sandra has a great exercise for that. So stay with us for the next two parts.
Yeah, the shadow is a huge topic today, huge, because we label everything that isn't working as the shadow. And the shadow is an amazing force in nature. There's would be no life without the shadow. We live on a planet of duality. Yes, we can enter with our spiritual work, the transcendent realms, but the bottom line is we live on a planet of duality. And so there's the shadow sides in us of things that we need to look at, of, where we start talking about what we hate and what we don't trust, and, all the negative things we love to project onto others is part of the shadow that we have to look inside of us. And so after Renee and I talk about the personal shadow, we'll jump over to see how there would be no life without the shadow, because the shadow is nature. So
Absolutely. So we kind of call this one, your personal day and night, your personal life and death, all about the personal stuff, which they're inextricably connected. You can't, when we start to look at what's going on out in the world, we cannot, for me, this is, my biggest practice is that I always bring it back to the self. And one of the things I always do when I'm working with my coaching clients is I use the step work that I learned, so that I look at the resentments and what I keep refeeling, because when I keep looking at what my resistances are and what I refeel in my life over and over again, it inevitably leads me to, what is that part of myself that I see in you that I need to heal in myself, because, there I am again and again and again. And, we get, the more healed I get, the more I get a break from that aspect. But then all of a sudden it will just boom, hit me right in, smack me. Like I call that a wind slap sometimes when I'm just not even looking. And then I have to turn around and take it back into the self.
yeah, and I think one of the biggest teachings that I share with my groups is that the shadow is to be acknowledged. It's to be acknowledged. It's not to run away from it, and it's not to deny it, because if you deny the shadow parts of yourself, or the shadow parts of nature, and the shadow parts of the collective, then what happens is the shadow actually is a living being, and it comes and chases you down like a dog. And it makes sure that, that you acknowledge it. So, when you stuff all that negativity within and just put a smile on your face and you go, shadow, I have no shadow side. All of a sudden you find yourself, what I've seen in the past, I'm not trying to plant any negative seeds for you here. I see people, all of a sudden something tragic happens in their life because they weren't looking at the part of night, of when the sun goes down, and the dark night of the soul, and we try to ignore that. And so life gets our attention, and it will find a way to bring us down. And so I see the shadow as a neutral force where we just acknowledge it. Yeah, I have a part in me that hates. I have a part in me that doesn't like. I have a part in me that's really sad and judgmental, and I still love myself. And this way, the shadow doesn't have to get out of control.
Absolutely. And some of the conversations that have been going on, and we'll talk more about that in the collective, but sometimes my little prejudice rears its ugly little head out of the blue. Like, I like to think that I'm, holier than thou sometimes. And then all of a sudden I'm there like, wow, where did my father's voice come up at the dinner table, 50 years later, excluding that the prejudice still lives on. So that, as much as I tried not to be my father, I became him too, and this is like, and the good news is that part of me, I think it was Mother Teresa who said that she could see that Hitler inside of her, which then made her become more of service. So when we start to own that we are all capable. And I'll never forget when I was in college, I took this like a graduate level course in the Holocaust. And one of the questions this dean asked us after she had us read a stack of books, yay high, was the question on the exam was, so you're sergeant or, SS sergeant so-and-so, and you're walking around Auschwitz for the day. What's going on in your mind? What's going on in your life? And it was, it was like 4 hours later, I was still writing because first of all, you had to put it all in historical context and have, the right, vernacular to go with what was going on. But it was like, what would I be thinking? What would, what part of that lives in me that could bring me to that place where, I could commit those heinous crimes? And I'm glad I had that experience so young, because it was an opening of a doorway for me that I didn't even know until many, many years later.
Yeah, and I think that the point that you're making is we all have all parts inside of us, because yes, we live in a planet of duality, but the illusion is that we're separate from each other. We're all one, and we're all connected psychically, and we're connected as living beings, and we're connected to this giant web of life. And so we do have all those parts inside of us, and we do play different roles in life. And that's part of the shadow too, is what role are you playing in life? Of how you interact with others and interact with the environment, because we're all changing roles all the time, but there's something about keeping the balance when all aspects are played out.
And learning to love all aspects. And I know you've been, in a relationship for a long time, and, I have some significant friendships that have been really long lasting, and learning to the place where you can love all sides of that person when they're having a tantrum, when they're, all to know that that's all that they bring, that it's not like, oh, I only like you when you're giving me what I want, but, oh, I respect that, that deep well of your soul is a container for all of these different parts, is when you really can move a relationship from expecting that somebody's ever going to give you what you want, because they're not.
Right.
Show up, oh, I got something today. Isn't that great? And it becomes as an ongoing surprise.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a good point.
Right? Because, that's where a love deepens and really, really grows. And this last year I had a falling out with a friend. We seem to blow up every 6 or 7, maybe 10 years. And I had to look at, what did I miss? Was I willing to trade off all the easy parts of the relationship for the parts that I found more challenging? And, so it was like a real big growing experience for, what I expect and how I show up in my own life, which our expectations are probably some of our biggest, shadowy natures for sure. Don't you think?
Yeah. That reminds me, the other night I had this vision. My husband and I have an extraordinary relationship. I mean, we feel really, really lucky that we found each other, and we've been together. He's better at time frames, but 24 years. But one of the things the spirit showed me the other night is, we've had tragedy in our life, like in everybody's life. And the tragedy, it was like it pulled us apart in some way and then moved us back together into a completely different energetic pattern. So I had this bizarre vision in the middle of the night of how, as things, we weren't fighting with each other, but things were happening in our lives that just pulled us apart. And then when we came back together, we always came back stronger. So there's been this energetic dance of being like this, some tragedy coming in and going like this, and then coming back, but even stronger, and building a deeper relationship. And so these shadow parts of ourselves, they dance with each other. And as different parts of the shadow are expressed, we get to reform in a different way. Where if you're not willing to express them, then there's a stunted growth. And that's a lot of what we're looking at today, is people being afraid to grow because it demands a lot of change.
Absolutely. And it's not all, it sometimes change is easy, like you get a blast of wind and all of a sudden everything looks new. But I don't know, for me, like I've had to really deal with some aspects of myself, even in my shamanic initiations. One time I was hit with some energy, and soon afterwards I had a massage and I got a pinched nerve in my neck. And it took years to heal. And finally, what I finally saw about my deepest aspects of myself is there was parts of myself that I was unable or unwilling to turn my neck to see something in a different light. And there were some really ugly parts about who in my loving self, I was also those other awfuler parts of myself. I don't even know how to say it, that the things that there were things that I thought I should be able to get for myself in life that were really greedy and selfish and, and self-serving and without any regard for anyone else. And yet in my broken emotional self, it was a driving, wanton force that I didn't know how to heal. And I think it took a pinched nerve in my neck to really stop me long enough to really to deal with that kind of pain. And then I turned it inward to really look deeper into my own soul.
That's beautiful. Yeah, which is what it's all about. The thing is to honor the shadow, to express the shadow, and then to be able to come back to yourself and to the goodness of who you are, but that part had to be expressed because it's just a part of life. So.
Right. It was a wanting of I got kind of into a little thing the other day on Facebook with somebody. They were talking about, changing, forgiveness as opposed to saying I'm sorry, which, that's a really shadowy topic. And he said something about making a promise to do something different. And I'm thinking I go, that is ridiculous. I mean, I couldn't help myself. It was like one of those times I had to, put my foot into something. I'm there like, if we could only just make promises to be different, wouldn't that be just grand? But, when one of the things I learned in AA is I had to amend those behaviors. Like I had this affair with somebody once, and one of the things I had to do was I had to call not the person I had the affair with, but the person that they were involved with, and I'll tell you, that was one of the hardest things that I had to do in all my amend process. And I said, is there anything else I can do to make this right? And she said, well, don't ever do this to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I mean, talk about stopping in your tracks and looking at yourself, and sure enough, within 6 months, had this thing where I was attracted to unavailable people, and it showed up again. And those words that this person said, "Don't ever do this to anyone else," was like between the promise of, yes, I'm going to make this promise, and can I really amend this behavior? And lo and behold, I was able to amend that behavior. And through the process of amending the behavior, I got to see what I was seeking in the unavailable was that I was unavailable to myself.
That's great. Yeah, that's the key, is when you're willing to work it through. When I've shared this, I think, on other shows, at the worst times of my life, at the darkest nights of the soul, my mantra, I have two mantras. One is the only way out is through, and spirit will always carry you through. But Renee, what you're talking about is the only way out is through. And when you go deep, when you allow yourself to just go deep into that behavior and look at it and not run away from it, and you come through to another side and to another revelation, and then you can grow into a different part of yourself.
And then there's always more.
And there's always more, and that's what life is about.
Right. Then there's always more. And so, there's been so much psychological work done on it, on these aspects. What I particularly love about the shamanic aspects of it is that through the process of doing energy work and journey work and stuff, you don't necessarily have to, put the galoshes on and tromp in the mud through every little last painful experience you had. Although some of us are hard-headed and you have to do that. So but some of these things have just, over the last few years, have been simply refined and changed by, some of the medicine work I've done, some of the homeopathic work I've done, and certainly some of the journey work that I've done. And especially, I say this to Sandra all the time, is that this shaman's cave for me is, first of all, well, the exercises we are doing are really, they're big, and they always take my week and reconstruct it in a whole new way about something else that I'm going to grow into, or a space that I'm holding into. And so hold my hat, because we're gonna go in and we're gonna look at the shadow of the self.
Yeah, well, it's time for all of us to look at the shadow in ourselves. So thank you, Renee, for leading us on this.
Well, I always get, when I start to read what we're going to do, because I do the production, Sandra does the writing, and she does that so brilliantly. And so I'm looking last night, okay, what are we going to do? And all of a sudden, this exercise came to me when I was out swimming, kind of my swim wind walk, and about doing a mirror on the wall kind of a journey, and seeing really who is the fairest of them all, and who's not so fair in them all. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do a journey, and I think I will rattle.
Okay.
And I'll call in the wind at some point. I've learned how to do it while I'm rattling. I'm quite organized with this, and that we're going to envision ourselves in a room where there's a foggy mirror. So get yourself ready. And as we start, imagine either a person, place, or institution or thing that's disrupting you today. Now, don't necessarily pick the biggest thing that you're not going to solve in this little short meditation, because you can go back and journey on this again, but something that you saw on Facebook, something a partner did, something that's really disrupting your day. Imagine yourself standing in front of a foggy mirror. The bathroom steamed up. And then write with your pointer finger in big, sweeping, broad strokes everything that is bothering you about this particular situation, about this person, about this thing, about this institution. What did they do to you? How is it interfering with your day? And as you're writing, the mirror begins to clear. And as the mirror begins to clear with your words and their shadows, look into your own eyes. As you gaze into the mirror and you are looking at yourself, ask, where have I done this or something similar to someone else in another place, in another time? Look deeply into your eyes. Watch as you transform into that other place and that other time to see yourself mirroring the same behavior, the same disruption, the same distraction. If you cannot see, ask, how did I take the situation and use it for my advancement, for the betterment of my own situation, for the betterment of myself? There's a gift in the mirror waiting for you. Ask the mirror to give you this gift of clarity, of light, shadow, and then thank the mirror and come back into your room, back into this space, back into this time.
That was brilliant. I was amazed at how quickly everything came up for me. It was like there was no question. It was like, this is what's going on now, and this is actually what has happened in the past where in your behavior to others. And so it was immediate how it came up. I really appreciated it.
And for those of you who might not have gotten it so immediately, you can always go back to these journeys, and some of them we're actually even removing as just journeys themselves. So when you sign up for the Shamans Cave, you receive the one that's on there now is the ancestor journey, but maybe we'll put the mirror journey down there and just change them out as we go. We have a great editor who does these things for us, and so thank you, Tyler, in advance. And I'm looking forward to doing this later. I got it in the middle of the night where I had to look in the mirror, and the thing was for me was like, well, do you think that you really can take people on this journey? And it's like, like, who do you think you are, kind of thing. And that's always a good humbling experience for me, is like, who do I think I am? And, I don't think I'm any in my circle. I always tell all the wind believers, listen, I just wrote the book. The next generation of people are going to bring this work way deeper in, and I need all of you to reflect back to the wind what's going on, because it's not like a one person experience here. And so, I try to hold that vision, and I hope you can kind of hold that vision that you are just a piece of the puzzle, a part of the pie. And make sure you remember that, so you don't beat yourself up every time you see the shadow, but you can embrace it and grow from there.
Absolutely. That's the key, is embrace the shadow. I know for a while, when I have a monthly column called the Transmutation News that's on sandraingerman.com, and I haven't missed a month since the year 2000. And for so many years, I really did focus, on the shadow, and just really the last few years trying to get people to go as deep into the depths of their inner world as they possibly can, because it is what's being reflected out into this world. But a lot of us just don't want to go deep enough where we can clear that, so that we have a different reflection in the outer world. And so for years, I've been encouraging people, keep going deeper, keep going deeper. Don't be afraid to embrace the darkness, because there's such lessons there. And you come out all regenerated, illuminated, and clean. And your whole frequency and your whole energy patterns can now take on a different flow in life.
Absolutely. It reminded me of what my mother once said to me, which is the opposite of that. She told me if I had only had children, I wouldn't have had time to be so self-absorbed. Love you, Mom. And for that generation, that was really how they looked at the world. But it's required now for us to go deeper if we're going to navigate our next conversation, which is going to be the collective shadow. So definitely, if you're here, look for part 2. They're all archived on shamanstv.com, or you can go over to Shamans TV on Facebook. They're archived there as well. And make sure you sign up if you want to receive this wisdom in your inbox every week.
Yeah, and continue to go to shamanstv.com, just as Renee has encouraged us to do, because there's such a wealth. And people are sending in some questions now on the Shaman's Cave email, which we actually already have covered in other shows. And so look at the archives, because it's amazing how much that we've already done. So we're not going to repeat topics. I'm just sending people back to the archives to find the topics where their questions are.
Absolutely. So we'll see you next week on the Shaman's Cave.
Blessings, everyone.